We have Vinay Sitapati, lawyer, journalist, and assistant professor of political science at Ashoka University. Today, we are going to speak with him about his new book, Jugalbandi, which is already topping the charts in India. Vinay, welcome to Bar and Bench, and thank you so much for taking out time.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. I've been following Bar and Bench for years, so it's nice to actually meet you and meet Bar and Bench in person.
Thank you. How would you describe your time at NLSIU? After that, you went to Harvard and Princeton, if I'm correct.
So I had a great time. So I got into National Law School, Bangalore, because I didn't want to do engineering, I didn't want to do medicine, I didn't want to be a chartered accountant at the age of 17. So I looked at the National Law School entrance test, and it had a lot of quizzing, it had a lot of general knowledge, and I said this is the kind of thing that I enjoy, and so I joined it for that reason. I did a lot of legal internships in the High Court, in the Supreme Court, and I enjoyed myself, but I realized this is not for me. But even today, like the work that I do, after National Law School Bangalore, I went to Harvard Law School. So I had 2 law degrees, and then I didn't follow the law, which is, I think, unusual. But even today, if you look at this book, without my legal training, there's no way I would be able to make this book bulletproof.
What drew you to studying politics after graduating in law?
Well, so I had done internships, so I just felt that litigation or corporate law is not for me. And simultaneously, I liked reading newspapers, I liked reading magazines, I began contributing to newspapers on political stories. And I realized that it gave me a lot of joy, writing, also thinking about politics. So immediately after my master's at Harvard Law School, I said I should do a PhD in political science. And I liked being in a US university, but I didn't want to go degree to degree. So I said, let me do something in India that will complement my PhD. So I spent a couple of years with Indian Express as a political journalist. And I think that really helped me get a sense of reality before I went back to academia. And even today, my writing, I would say, is a mix of academic rigor with journalistic writing as well as legal sort of attention to detail. So in that sense, looking back, my journalistic career, my legal training and my PhD in political science, all of them kind of helped me, but I didn't know it at the time. So at the time, it was a very intuitive journey.
Did you approach writing this book as a lawyer or as a historian? And how much impact your legal training had on your writing?
Well, actually both, in the sense that I never stopped to ask myself, is this a work of history? I'm a political scientist. Yeah. So unlike historians, I care about causation, that for example, one of the questions that drives this book is, why does the BJP win? And it's a very clear question. I'm looking for a clear answer. I'm looking at A leads to B leads to C. Historians don't like that kind of stuff. That's what political scientists do. At the same time, so much of this book required legal training, and I'll give you 3 examples. One is just reading. I had to read so much, I had to read secondary material, books, I had to read archives. All of that is impossible without legal training. National Law School Bangalore taught me to read, especially when the reading is boring, So that it really taught me to do. Second is that it's about construction of an event. Like, for example, I have a story here where the RSS in the mid-1960s is very angry about Vajpayee's relationship with Rajkumari Kaul, who's a married woman. And the head of the RSS at that time, Guru Golwalkar, calls a meeting of the RSS, and different members of the RSS have different opinions. Some say that he should break off the relationship, others say that he should get married. A third person says, let the relationship continue as well as nobody knows. And finally, Golwalkar makes a decision that Vajpayee should break the relationship. Vajpayee refuses. And I show here that that's the beginning of the tension between RSS and Vajpayee that all your viewers know about. But how do I reconstruct that event, right? There were 3 or 4 people talking there. All of them are dead, right? So I had to basically talk and interact with those who they had told their version to. Even in the best of times, people don't tell you 100% the truth, even in the best of times, right? These are all things that only lawyers can kind of wade through, or judges can wade through, which is that you have witnesses saying conflicting information. How do you weld it together? How do you ignore information? How do you see self-serving witnesses? So definitely my legal training helped with that. I think a third thing is that it helped make this book bulletproof, which is the book has 1800 footnotes. It's a very controversial topic. So I don't want to be caught saying that you haven't crossed your T's or dotted your I's. So that eye for detail is definitely something that lawyers have. And to give you an example, 5 top lawyers, friends of mine, I've thanked them in this book, read this draft, right? And these are lawyers who charge 60,000 rupees for an hour of reading. And I used to make a lot of fun of them when right now saying, yeah, lawyers, why do they charge so much money? I now realize why. That attention to detail is just absolutely remarkable.
I'll come to the book now. This is your second book after Half Lion. In Jugalbandi, you talk about the BJP before Modi and also the relationship between Atal Bihari Vajpayee and LK Advani. My question is, Vajpayee and Advani had several brushes with the law, from the emergency to allegations against Advani in the Hawala and Babri cases. They were in and out of courts. How did this impact their friendship?
Well, I think 2 things. One is that at deep level, both of them felt that the solution to the problems in India were political, not legal. So I have a quote in this book where, this is the famous ADM Jabalpur case, where which also includes Vajpayee and Advani, who had been incarcerated. They had won in the High Court, thanks to MC Chagla, but in the Supreme Court they lost. All your viewers know that the sordid history of ADM Jabalpur, and when Vajpayee hears about that, his lawyer tells them that, look, the verdict is you have to remain in jail, you don't have habeas corpus. Vajpayee says, look, these problems can only be solved through politics, not law. And then Advani, who's somewhere else, another jail, is told that this is what Vajpayee ji has said, and he said he's right. And so that was their general attitude, that fundamentally theirs was a political movement, not a legal movement. Unlike a lot of politicians, neither of them were lawyers. On the other hand, the subject of my first biography, Narasimha Rao, was a lawyer, so that they had a bit of a different attitude. But the several times that they went to jail, right, actually brought them together. So I point out that in the initial months of the emergency, when they were together in jail, Vajpayee used to cook for Advani, Advani used to do the cleaning. So that brush with the law actually brought them together. And when Advani is arrested after the demolition of Babri Masjid, Vajpayee becomes the equivalent of his defense lawyer in parliament, saying that Advani ji feels very bad about it, things went out of control. So if you look at, and the law is a constant thread through this book, but really Hindu nationalism didn't see itself as coming through to power through, by thinking of itself through the constitution. It has a sense of India and a sense of itself that precedes the constitution. In that sense, Hindu nationalism doesn't feel that the constitution constitutes India. That doesn't mean they're anti-constitutional at all. They are very happy to use the processes of the constitution, work within the constitution. And a core argument of my book is that Hindu nationalism is constituted by elections. And elections is the bleeding heart of what democracy as enshrined in the constitution looks like. So that part of their relationship to the law remained constant, but definitely their brushes with jail actually brought them closer to each other.
Having had the law used against them in the emergency, how did Advani and Vajpayee view the Indian legal system and the courts? Although you mentioned in the previous answer of yours that politics works more than the law, did they view the law instrumentally or as an institution of integrity?
I would say a mix of both. So certainly for Hindu nationalism it is instrumental, and I don't mean this in a negative way. It is that they have a deep idea of Indian society, of rules which may or may not be the same as the law itself. So there are a lot of informal norms, rules that govern society that is not the law. In that sense, the classic liberal idea of the law, that the law will be used to refashion society, is something that Hindu nationalism has always been suspicious of, and from the 50s itself they have been complaining endlessly of what they feel are laws that particularly target Hinduism, right? This has always been their complaint, and of course your viewers can decide whether they're right or they're wrong. But Pallavi, if you wear a mask long enough, the mask becomes your face. So for about 50 years, Vajpayee and Advani were in parliament, where you had for most of that period the Nehruvian consensus, respect for the law, the understanding that law is an instrument of social change, etc., etc. And over time, the two of them were definitely shaped by that idea. Particularly, I would say the emergency. I think the fact that so many RSS pracharaks, Advani, Vajpayee, so many opposition leaders were thrown in jail during the emergency, made the BJP of that era, and note I'm saying that era, realize that if we do it to them, they will one day do it to us. And ironically, I think that entire generation of politicians were shaped in respecting civil liberties because what Indira Gandhi did to them during the emergency. So, Ram Guha has this famous line that the Janata Party was shaped in the jails of North India. I would even say that respect for individual freedom was shaped in the jails of North India in the 1970s.
In the book, you mentioned the role of N.M. Ghatate, Vajpayee's friend and lawyer. Did you talk to Ghatate in the 200 interviews that you did? What was it like to represent a friend over 5 decades?
So N.M. Ghatate is a remarkable figure, and any sort of person who's studying the role of lawyers in 20th century India, you have to have a couple of pages in your book on N.M. Ghatate. So just see how remarkable this figure is. N.M. Ghatate comes from RSS blue blood, right? His father was one of the founders of the RSS, one of the founders of the Hindu Mahasabha, right? Ghatate in I think 1957 comes to Delhi from Nagpur because he's got admission in a law program in Delhi. Now, where does he stay? Who does he meet? Of course, he'll meet the young Jansangh MP because it is after all one family. So he initially stays for I think a little bit of time with Vajpayee. Then he moves out on his own. That's also a period in which Advani and Vajpayee are getting to know each other. So Ghatate is this young law student and gets to know all of them. And that bond stays for the next 50 years. So for example, during the emergency, it's Ghatate who is going to the jails, who's meeting the different Swayamsevaks in jail, the different Pracharaks in jail, meeting Vajpayee and Advani. That's what he's doing. But his life also takes a slightly different turn. Namely, he goes for a PhD to the US, I think to American University in Washington DC, and then comes back and works as the legal junior to Krishna Menon. Just think about it, right? This is a man who is from RSS blue blood, right? Whose father was one of the founders of Hindu nationalism, who is best friend of Vajpayee and Advani. And who does he become a legal junior for? He becomes a legal junior for Nehru's best friend, right? And who was the former, I think he was foreign minister and I think he was briefly defense minister also, Krishna Menon. And he is even today very loyal to Krishna Menon. So he is loyal to Vajpayee, loyal to Krishna Menon, and Krishna Menon, after he was sacked after the China War of 1962 because he was blamed for it, started a career as a Supreme Court lawyer, and who was assisting him but N.M. Ghatate. And even today, he will not hear one word of criticism from Vajpayee and one word of criticism against Krishna Menon. And that just tells you the ability of lawyers, right, to have friends on both sides of the aisle. No other profession would be able to do what Ghatate was able to do.
Your book contains interesting tidbits on court cases, including the time when MC Chagla, who was a junior to Jinnah, represented the two princes of Hindu nationalism, which is Vajpayee and Advani. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So in the case that eventually became ADM Jabalpur case, in the High Court it was MC Chagla who represented Vajpayee and Advani. MC Chagla was a Gujarati Muslim, right? He was a junior to Muhammad Ali Jinnah, right? But he decided to stay back in India because he felt that Jinnah's two-nation theory was devastating to those Muslims in those parts of India where Muslims were a minority, right? And he was prescient that the biggest catastrophe for Indian Muslims has been partition, right? And he is their lawyer, but he's a lawyer for a deeper reason. He doesn't like Indira Gandhi. He considers himself culturally a Hindu. He contributes to Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan journal, which is a Hindu journal, right? A Hindu, not a Hindu nationalist, but a traditional Hindu journal. And in 1980, this is after the emergency ends, when the BJP is being founded, he's the chief guest. So you have a lawyer, right? A legal junior to Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and a man who would eventually become the Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court, who is the chief guest at the founding of the BJP in Bombay, or the founding convention of the BJP in Bombay in December 1980, which, by the way, Pallavi, is 40 years to the month from today, right? So that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this book, because 40 years ago to this month was the founding of the BJP, and it was a lawyer, right? A very, very famous lawyer who was the chief guest at the convention.
What do you think Advani and Vajpayee would have viewed the Prime Minister Modi's use of existing legal system and the relationship with the courts?
I don't know that, because my book ends in 2004, and one thing I learned, from my time as a lawyer is don't exceed your brief. So I know very well what I do know, which is that the period 1924 to 2004. After that, it's just much harder for me to say. But if I must speculate, a lot of the respect, and this is some of my legal writing I have done independent of this, that a lot of the power, because one of the puzzles we asked in India is how come the Supreme Court has been so powerful. My own sense has been it's not about norms or respecting tradition. You know, I know I sound like a heretic in front of bar and bench, but I don't think that the Supreme Court has popular roots in India. Unlike elections or the Election Commission in India, which has popular roots, because all Indians feel that election is their right. All Indians don't feel that filing a writ petition before the Supreme Court is their right. And I have to break it to my law friends who write lots of books and articles on this. So what has guaranteed the power of the higher judiciary in India is a fragmented executive. So if you think about it and you see high points of the Supreme Court in India, it's always been when the executive has been not getting a majority on its own, part of a coalition, you have a strong opposition. So the Supreme Court steps in as a referee. In all the periods where you've had a powerful executive, right? Indira Gandhi, even Nehru, right? And Nehru's ability, Nehru of course was very decent to the Supreme Court, but nonetheless he passed the First Amendment, right? I think you're entering that phase in India once again today, which is you have a very powerful executive. And once again, I'm straying beyond my brief in legal terms, but in that sense, it's not clear to me that Modi is any different from other very, very powerful prime ministers before him. And it tells us something about the roots of Supreme Court legitimacy in India. And I'm sorry that, you know, going again my legal cast, that it's not a very flattering story.
Would it be a fair comparison to call Vajpayee the arguing counsel of BJP and Advani the behind the scenes drafting counsel?
Well, certainly you're right on Vajpayee, right? And here's the thing, it was socially engineered. That from the beginning itself, Hindu nationalism has always needed an orator or an arguing counsel and an organizer, right? So that's why I wouldn't say that, you know, Advani is a draftsman. So that's where the analogy kind of drops. But certainly they need an arguing counsel, right? But then they need somebody to do the actual organizing, to go get the files, to meet people, to talk to the clients. You need that kind, right? So you need a little bit, so maybe a, you know, like a solicitor and an arguing counsel. But this is embedded in Hindu nationalism itself. So right from the founding of the Jansangh, you have Shama Prasad Mukherjee, arguing counsel, who is the youngest vice chancellor of Calcutta University, English speaking, excellent orator. And you have the organizer Deen Dayal Upadhyay, right? The dhoti wearing, Hindi speaking. Exactly the same between Vajpayee and Advani, and now you have Amit Shah and Modi. So I think that the ideology itself needs an arguing counsel and an organizer. And Vajpayee and Advani perfectly fit that role.
Do you think lawyers make better politicians than others who come from different other fields?
Hard to say, right? One thing we do know is that lawyers tend to be attracted to politics. So there's a disproportionate number of lawyers who are politicians. As I told you, the subject of my first biography, Narasimha Rao, was a lawyer, and it showed. You know, because when I looked at his archives, there were lots of files. You know, he had heavy file notings, he underlined, and I said, this man has legal training, right? And his break in politics itself came because he began his legal career as a legal junior to this man Burgul Ramakrishna Rao, who would eventually become the chief minister of, I think, Hyderabad state, which is the precursor for Andhra. So even through the law, his political career kind of begins, right? Vajpayee and Advani didn't have that. So they didn't see the world as, you know, through text. Neither of them saw the world through text. Neither of them saw the world through the state, right? That's not where they felt India lay. They felt India lay in its society. And I think that comes from the fact that they weren't lawyers. I think if you're trained in a lawyer, you cannot then say that laws don't matter, courts don't matter. Really, you know, where the pulse of India lies in its people. That's not something that, again, with due respect to your viewers, I don't think that's something that lawyers are comfortable believing in.
Who do you think is Vajpayee's true successor as an orator?
It's hard to say, you know, because there's nobody like him in 20th century India. There's just nobody, because, you know, Narendra Modi commands respect, right? But Vajpayee could make you laugh, he could make you cry, you know, he could seduce you, he could astonish you. He had the range of human emotions when he spoke. And he had another talent which I think lawyers respect widely, which is that his sentences meant slightly different things to different people, right? That's a very careful draftsman which ensured that he had plausible deniability at any time. So to give you just one last example on this, he goes to Pakistan in around 1998, famously, your viewers know, on the Lahore bus, right? And he gives this speech to the glitterati of Pakistan. And in the speech he says, and he says in Hindi, so I'm translating, that when I came here, people are wondering whether by coming here to Pakistan, I am putting a mohor or a seal on Pakistan's existence, right? And what he's basically trying to say is that there are people in the RSS who are saying that Pakistan should not exist to begin with. And then Vajpayee says, I am here to tell you that Pakistan does not need anybody's seal or mohor. That's a remarkable sentence because the RSS is not irritated, while at the same time these people know exactly what they mean. I think that's quite remarkable.
And I have to end it with this last one. I know you've answered this in a couple of your other interviews as well, but I want you to answer it for our viewers. What's the difference between Modi-Shah partnership and the Advani-Vajpayee Jugalbandi?
I think one difference is that Vajpayee and Advani were very different from each other. That they disagreed on things like Ayodhya or the Gujarat riots. I suspect that Modi and Amit Shah agree on 90% of things. And the word Jugalbandi, which is the title of the book, presumes musicians who are different from each other, right? Second is that fundamentally Vajpayee and Advani were playing an equal music. That at the end of the day, they were through ups and downs, it was an equal partnership. Right now, between Modi and Amit Shah, it's pretty clear who's boss. Maybe that will change. If that happens, this Jugalbandi is more like the older one.
So we have Vinay Sitapati's Jugalbandi, and I'm sure from this interview you would all be prompted to read it. So you can all buy it on Amazon. Thank you for watching it.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon.